Have you ever wondered what it would be like to talk with Jesus? Not a prayer full of big fancy words, but a heart-to-heart chat, like you'd have with a friend.
Wait a minute, is that even possible? I mean, doesn't it seem kinda too far off? Jesus is, well, Jesus.
That's what a lot of people think, but it doesn't have to be that way. The Bible gives us incredible examples of people who spoke with God in a simple, fearless way. Want to see an example? Matthew 6:6. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen. You know what that means?
That it's just between us and God. No complications.
Exactly. It's about intimacy. Closing the door means leaving the world outside and focusing only on God. And the most amazing thing, He hears you. He's there.
Wow, so it's like straight to the point. No formalities.
No formalities at all. That's what we're talking about today. How you can start this conversation whether you've never prayed before or you already have a faith routine but want something deeper.
Oh, and before we move on, be sure to leave a comment and like the video. Who knows? This might just change the way you talk to God.
Let's take a step back for a moment. Did you know that back in biblical times, praying in public was really common? It was almost like a show. A lot of people did it to impress others.
Seriously? Like to show off?
Exactly. But then Jesus comes along and changes everything. He teaches that prayer isn't about what other people see. It's about what God sees. That's what He's saying in Matthew 6:6. It's something so intimate, so private. It doesn't need an audience.
Makes sense. If it's a conversation, it's more like, I don't know, talking to a real friend, right? Not to the whole group.
Exactly. And think about it. Jesus prayed too. He would slip away from the crowds, find quiet places to talk to the Father. For example, in Mark 1:35, it says he got up very early in the morning and went off to a solitary place to pray. It's not about quantity, it's about quality.
So what really matters isn't how you do it, but the heart behind it.
Perfect. And in the next scene, we're going to see how to bring this into our own lives, step by step. Now picture this. You wake up on a tough day, your mind full of problems. What do? Many of us complain, look for answers on our phone, or just let anxiety take over.
Yeah, I do that sometimes. And you know what happens? It doesn't fix anything.
Exactly. But Philippians 4:6 says something amazing. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. In every situation, see? Not just the big crises.
Like, even the small stuff? Like asking God to help me plan my day?
Yes, God doesn't care about the size of your request. He wants you to share everything with Him, just like venting to someone who truly gets you. So how do you start? Really simply. First, say how you're feeling. Picture Jesus sitting right in front of you. You could say something like, Jesus, I'm tired today. I don't know what to do about this or that. Help me. That's prayer.
But what if I don't know what to say? Like, if I can't find the words?
That happens sometimes. The Bible talks about it too. Romans 8:26 says the Holy Spirit intercedes for us through wordless groans. In other words, even if you can't put it into words, God understands your heart.
That's comforting. So I don't have to be perfect, right?
Never. Prayer is about sincerity, not performance. And if you want, you can start with gratitude. Like it says in Philippians, with thanksgiving. That helps shift your perspective, helps you see what you already have, even in tough times. So think about this. Talking with Jesus is really simple. You don't need fancy words or a special place. You can do it in the quiet of your room, on a walk, or even in the midst of everyday chaos.
It's like opening your heart and letting Him be part of your day, right? Like a friend who's always around.
That's it. And it's just the beginning. Because trust me, once you start talking to Him, the answer won't be long in coming. We'll explore this together in the next part.
But wait, what if God has already answered before we even ask? How do we know that? Let's find out.
Have you ever felt like you needed an urgent answer? And all of a sudden something happens that seems like the perfect solution, almost like someone already knew exactly what you needed.
Oh, I felt that. Like when you're worried about something and, out of the blue, a message or a conversation seems to fall from the sky, but is that really God answering?
It could be, The Bible says in Isaiah 65:24, Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. God knows our needs before we even speak.
Wow, so that means he kind of gets ahead to help us?
Exactly. He's not just a God who listens, but a God who moves, who acts even before we realize we need him. One of the best examples of this is Hagar's story in Genesis 21. Do you know it?
Hagar, isn't she the one who was sent away by Abraham and ended up in the desert with her son?
That's right. She was in the desert with no water, desperate, thinking her son Ishmael was going to die. But do you know what happens? God sends an angel who says, "Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying." Even before Hagar called out, God had already provided a well of water nearby.
Whoa, it's like he already knew she would need help.
Exactly. And that shows that God not only hears, but he also sees. He sees our tears, our struggles, even when we can't speak.
This changes everything. So even at times when I don't know what to ask for, he's already working.
Yes, and that's what I want to talk about today, how to recognize those answers that often go unnoticed. Now think about this with me. How many times have you thanked God for something you only realized after it worked out? Like an opportunity that showed up, a door that opened, or even deliverance from a bad situation?
Oh, lots of times. But to be honest, there are also times when I complain because I didn't understand what was going on.
So that's normal, we're like that. But Philippians 4:19 reminds us of something powerful. My God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. He not only answers, but he answers perfectly, even if it doesn't seem like it at the moment.
Oh, so even the things that seem like no answer might actually be part of the plan.
For sure. Sometimes the answer is no or wait, because God has something better prepared.
But hang on. What about when someone prays for something and it doesn't happen? How do we explain that? Isn't it kind of unfair?
That's a tough question, but an important one. We need to remember that God's perspective is eternal. He sees the whole picture. Sometimes what seems like no answer is actually protection or preparation. Want a biblical example?
Sure, let's hear it.
Think about the Apostle Paul. In 2 Corinthians 12:7-9, he talks about a thorn in the flesh, something that really troubled him. He prayed 3 times for God to take it away, but the answer was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness."
So God said no because there was a purpose in it.
Exactly. Sometimes God allows certain things because they shape us, strengthen us, or draw us closer to him. So how do we live this out in practice? First, we need to learn to trust. Trust that God knows what's best, even when we don't understand.
And also pay attention to the little things, right? Like those answers that might be right in front of us.
That's it. God speaks through situations, people, and even through silence. We need to learn to notice these moments and be thankful, even before everything makes sense.
Now that's something to think about. Maybe the answers I thought never came were already there all along.
And that's what draws us closer to Jesus. Trusting, observing, and talking with him. It's a living relationship growing every day.
But hold on. What about those times when God's answer is so clear it changes everything? Have you ever thought about that?
Have you ever imagined what it would be like to get a direct answer from God? Something so clear that there's no doubt it came from him.
Like those Bible stories where God appears in a dream or speaks through an angel. Does that still happen today?
I'd say yes, but not in the way we expect. God has unique ways of answering, and often they're so clear that they leave us speechless. Want an example?
Sure. I want to understand how that works in practice.
Let's talk about the story of Moses and the burning bush, one of the most impactful moments in the entire Bible. Moses was just a simple shepherd in the desert. He had already fled Egypt, left his past behind, and probably thought his life would stay that way. But God had other plans.
Oh, the burning bush! That plant that was on fire but didn't burn up, right?
Exactly. Exodus 3 says that while Moses was tending his sheep, he saw something extraordinary, a bush on fire that wasn't being consumed by the flames. Curious, he went closer, and that's where God spoke to him.
Just imagine. It must have been terrifying and thrilling at the same time.
Definitely. God said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." He gave Moses a clear mission. Go back to Egypt and free the Israelites from slavery.
Wait a second. Didn't Moses hesitate? I mean, he wasn't super confident, right?
Exactly. Moses questioned, he argued, he even said he wasn't good with words. But God answered every doubt patiently, showing that he would be with Moses every step of the way. Now think about this. How many times in our lives do we feel like something is burning inside us, but we hesitate? God might be calling us to something big, but fear and insecurity hold us back.
Oh, I've been there. Sometimes there's an idea or a dream that just won't leave my mind, but I keep thinking, what if it doesn't work out?
That's normal, and it's exactly in those moments that God speaks the most clearly. When He gives us direction, He also gives us the strength and resources to move forward. It's like He told Moses, "I will be with you."
So it's like a reminder that we're not alone, right?
Exactly. And you know what's most amazing? God doesn't expect us to be perfect. He just wants us to trust Him and take the first step. Now let me tell you another story. Remember Paul on the road to Damascus? Acts 9 recounts one of the most amazing conversions of all time.
Yes, he was Saul before, right? He used to persecute Christians.
Exactly. He was on his way to Damascus with letters to arrest the followers of Jesus. But on the road, a brilliant light shone around him, and he heard the voice of Jesus, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?"
Wow, that was straight to the point, huh?
Direct and life-changing. Saul was blind for 3 days, but it was then that his life changed completely. He went from persecutor to one of the greatest apostles of Christ.
That shows that nobody is too far gone to be reached by God, huh?
Exactly. And God still speaks clearly today. Sometimes it's not through a bright light or a voice, but through people, circumstances, or even a Bible verse that appears at just the right moment. So, how can we be attentive to God's clear answers? First, we need to learn to listen. And to listen means creating quiet moments away from distractions.
Like turning off my phone for a few minutes and just staying in silence.
Exactly. In 1 Kings 19, when Elijah was looking for God, God wasn't in the strong wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He came in a gentle whisper.
So if I don't stop to listen, I might miss the answers.
Exactly. God speaks, but we have to pay attention. And another important thing, trust. Often answers come in ways we don't expect, but they always have a bigger purpose.
It's a learning journey, right? Learning to trust and see the answers, even when they're different from what I wanted.
That's right. God is still speaking, answering, and guiding us. All we need to do is open our hearts and trust that He's in control.
But what about when God's answer seems delayed? Has He forgotten about us?
How many times have you felt like you were asking God for something, but the answer just didn't come? As if He was silent.
Oh, many times. To be honest, that's one of the hardest things for me. It feels like I'm talking to myself, you know?
I know exactly what you mean, and the truth is we've all gone through that at some point. But did you know that even great heroes of faith in the Bible faced that same feeling?
Really? So they also waited around and felt like God was taking too long?
Exactly. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What to do when it seems like God is taking a while to answer. Let me tell you a story you might know. Remember Abraham and Sarah? God promised they would have a son, an incredible promise, right?
Yes, of course. But didn't they have to wait a really long time?
That's right. In Genesis 12, God makes the promise to Abraham. And do you know how long it took for that promise to be fulfilled? 25 years.
25 years, that's practically a lifetime of waiting.
Exactly. Abraham was 75 years old when God promised, and Isaac was only born when he was 100. During that time, they had doubts. They tried to help the promise happen on their own, and they even laughed at the idea.
Yeah, I can understand that. Imagine waiting so long for something so important.
But you know what that teaches us? That God fulfills His promises at the right time. He's never late, but He also doesn't work on our schedule. Now think with me. Why does God sometimes make us wait? Is He testing our patience? Or is there something deeper going on?
Maybe it's so we can learn to trust more, like to develop our faith.
Exactly. Waiting is not a punishment, it's a process. God uses that time to shape us, strengthen our faith, and prepare our hearts for what's coming.
But it's tough, right? We want everything right away, especially nowadays, with everything so fast.
That's true. But remember Isaiah 40:31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Waiting on the Lord transforms us. It gives us strength we wouldn't have otherwise.
So waiting isn't a waste of time, it's preparation.
Exactly. God never wastes a waiting period. He's always working, even when we don't see it. Want more examples? Let's talk about David. He was anointed as king of Israel when he was young, but do you know how long it took him to actually take the throne? About 15 years.
15 years? That sounds like an eternity for someone who received such a big promise.
Yes, it does. During that time, David was persecuted, had to hide from Saul, and faced challenges that could have led him astray from his purpose. But every single moment was used by God to prepare him as a leader.
So those years of waiting were like training for him, right?
Exactly. God doesn't waste anything. He uses every experience, every difficulty to prepare us for what He has in store.
That's comforting, knowing that even difficulties are part of His plan.
They are. And if we look at Jesus, we see the greatest example of waiting. He spent 30 years preparing for a ministry that lasted only 3 years. Every single day of His life had a purpose. Now, how does this apply to our lives? What can we do while we wait?
Good question. What do we do when it seems like God is silent?
First, we need to remember that God's silence is not His absence. He's always there even when we don't feel Him. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Sometimes waiting is an invitation to trust.
So it's like a call to strengthen our faith, right? To keep believing even when we can't see.
Exactly. And while we wait, we can use the time to grow, read the Word, pray, help others. Waiting doesn't have to be passive, it can be filled with purpose.
It's like planting a seed. We don't see it grow right away, but we know something's happening underground.
Perfect. And before we realize it, the answer comes. Not because we deserve it, but because God is faithful and keeps His promises.
So next time I feel like God is taking too long, I'll remember that He's working. His timing is always perfect.
And what about when we finally get the answer? How do we handle it and stay firm in our purpose? Finally, the answer arrives. After days, months, maybe even years of waiting, what you've been asking God for becomes reality. And now, how do you move forward?
That's a great question. Because to be honest, sometimes we think the end of the waiting is the end of the story. But is it really?
It's not the end, but the start of something bigger. God's answer always comes with a purpose, and that's what we're going to explore today. How to recognize and live out that purpose once we finally receive what we asked for. Let me share something with you. Remember the story of Joseph in Genesis? He received dreams from God when he was young, but it took years for those dreams to come true.
Oh, right. His dreams were about becoming a leader, weren't they? But he went through a lot before that happened.
Exactly. He was sold by his own brothers, falsely accused, thrown in prison, until finally he was raised to the position of governor in Egypt. And when that happened, do you know what he did?
He forgave his brothers, didn't he?
That's right. In Genesis 50:20, he says something amazing. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The answer Joseph received wasn't just for him, it was to save many people.
So, the purpose was bigger than he was. God used everything he went through for something much greater.
Exactly. And that happens to us too. When God answers our prayers, it's not just to satisfy our desires, but so we can bless other people. Now think with me. How many times do we receive something we asked God for, and right afterward we forget to give thanks or to consider the purpose behind it?
That happens a lot. We're so happy, we just enjoy the moment and don't stop to think about the why or what for.
Exactly. But you know, in Luke 17, Jesus heals 10 lepers and only one comes back to say thank you. He asks, "Weren't all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? This story reminds us that gratitude is the first step after we receive something from God.
That's true. We forget so quickly, don't we? It's easier to ask than to be thankful.
But it doesn't have to be that way. Gratitude isn't just saying thank you. It's living in a way that honors God's answer. It's using what we've received for the good of others. So, how can we recognize the purpose behind God's answers? First, we need to look to Him, not just at what we've received. We need to ask, God, what do you want me to do with this? So how can we recognize the purpose behind God's answers? First, we need to look to Him, not just at what we've received. We need to ask, God, what do you want me to do with this?
That makes sense. Because if God has a bigger plan, his answers are always part of that plan, right?
Exactly. Think of Esther. She became queen, which might have seemed like a personal privilege, but there was a much greater purpose. God put her in that position to save the people of Israel.
Oh, that's incredible. The famous line from her story, right? And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?
That's right. Esther 4:14. The answer God gave her was completely tied to the larger plan he was unfolding.
So we should ask ourselves, how can what I received impact other people?
Exactly. Whether it's a new job, a healing, or even a deliverance, everything has a purpose that goes beyond ourselves. Now let's talk about putting this into practice. First, gratitude. Always start by recognizing that it was God who answered you.
And not just with words, right? But with actions too.
That's right. Second, testimony. Share what God has done for you. In Revelation 12:11, it says that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. Telling others what God has done can inspire them to trust Him as well.
That's powerful. Sometimes what God did for me might be someone else's answered prayer.
Exactly. And third, action. Ask God how you can use what you've received to help others. Maybe it's sharing resources, time, or even encouraging words.
It's a cycle, isn't it? We receive, give thanks, share, and it keeps on impacting other lives.
That's it. God calls us to be instruments of His love and grace. And when we live that way, God's answer in our lives becomes an answer in other people's lives.
So the purpose never really ends. It's an ongoing calling.
Exactly. That's what makes our walk with God so extraordinary. Every answer, every silence, every period of waiting, it all fits into His perfect plan. And when we hand everything over to Him, we can trust He's in control.
So, what we've learned here is that God always answers, at the right time and with a greater purpose. May we live each day with gratitude, faith, and a willingness to fulfill what He has for us.
So what did you think of this journey? We talked about how to talk to Jesus, how to recognize His answers, wait for the right timing, and live out the purpose He has for our lives.
It was an incredible conversation, full of stories, reflections, and above all, hope. And most importantly, we learned that God is always present, listening, answering, and taking care of every detail.
If this content touched your heart, share it with someone you love. It might be the very word they need to hear today.
And don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. Together, we'll keep exploring topics that transform lives.
Carry this message with you. God always answers at the right time, in the right way, and with a greater purpose. Until next time, and may God bless your life.